Conversations That Matter is a partner program of the Center for Dialogue at Simon Fraser University. The production of this program is made possible thanks to the support of the following and viewers like you. Thank you for joining me.
My pleasure.
I think this is a very interesting topic at a pivotal point in our development as a country, because we're seeing so many people that are aging and aging beyond anything that we recognize. And with that, of course, comes a host of challenges that weren't present before. And you know, when we take a look at the issue of physician-assisted dying, we didn't have a mechanism in place to deal with it because it really wasn't part of the general experience. But now it is. So what was it that motivated you to say, I want to get behind this and be a part of making a change in the law of Canada?
Well, first of all, I'm a lawyer and I'm deeply committed to the values of the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms, the notion of individual autonomy. Second of all, my wife has been a long-time sufferer with multiple sclerosis, and she read in the newspaper that a challenge had been started by the BC Civil Liberties Union, and said that she would like to get involved. I was a very willing accomplice to that. I think at a more fundamental level, I was really interested in the notion of having the autonomy to make decisions, particularly if you weren't able to do what some people are able to do to end their own lives. You know, why are these people so disenfranchised? People who perhaps, like my wife, wouldn't have the physical means or ability to take their life when they had decided to do that, they had had enough out of illness. And it's not just old age, but illness and debilitating illness that robs you of the quality of life. And why should they have to do it in a context that is covert, that is illegal, that puts other people who might even be witnesses to the event at risk? And all of those things, you know, add up to the need to strike a challenge to this really backward legislation that is inconsistent with human values and that are embodied in the Charter.
The way the legislation was written initially, if you assisted in any manner to help somebody end their life who couldn't do it themselves, you could be charged with murder.
Exactly, and that's a pretty scary proposition for a family member who even witnesses it. There are people who've been prosecuted for buying a plane ticket, or at least there was a discussion. I remember there was a case in Nova Scotia where there was some discussion about prosecuting somebody who had assisted as Kay Carter and her husband had done they actually took their mom or Kay's mom to Switzerland.
And by becoming part of this case, they actually put themselves at risk, because they in essence are saying, this is what I did in contravention of the laws of Canada.
Exactly.
Now no, they haven't been charged, and
they won't be.
But that was a risk just coming forward.
Exactly.
And they came forward because they had to, help her mother end her life in secrecy, which is unfair.
Well, that's exactly right. The whole concept was unfair and discriminatory.
Mm-hmm. I know that Gloria Taylor became, involved in the case.
Right.
She said something very interesting when she was diagnosed with Lou Gehrig's disease that I found, touches me, and I can relate to it, because she pointed out that the point when she was diagnosed, she knew that she had a terminal illness and that it was going to be a downward slide from enjoyment of life to pretty horrendous
Horrible
existence.
end.
Yeah.
For sure.
But she said, so I know I'm going to die. And while I have the ability to end my own life, I don't want to because there's quality of life and there are things that I want to enjoy. But at the point where the scales tip against me physically and my ability to end my life, that's when I can't end my life because of all of that, and yet that's when I want to, but I can't go to anybody else and ask for their help. And so, like, how can that be reasonable? I'm allowed to commit suicide, but I'm not allowed to ask somebody else to help me do it.
Well, that's the unfair and discriminatory aspect of this, quite apart from the notion of autonomy and the broader principle, is that, first of all, the choices for ending one's own life can be pretty horrendous. You know, do you really want to end up shooting yourself or slashing your wrists? What does that do to your family? What does it do to all of the social context of your friends, people who care for you? How does it leave them, and what kind of a legacy does it leave for your children or your grandchildren that your parent was a suicide? And there is a tremendous stigma attached to it.
I got to get you to hang on for just a second here while we take a quick commercial break. We'll be right back. Conversations That Matter is a not-for-profit program made possible thanks to the charitable support of the following and from viewers like you. Please visit conversationsthatmatter.tv and help us to continue to produce this program. Thank you. But, you know, we are caught at this very interesting point in time where we're able to keep people alive. I came across this article earlier this week called "I Know You Love Me, Now Let Me Die." And it's sort of based on the fact that you go back 75, 80 years and anything before that, you got sick, you were at home, you would start to deteriorate, but you were around your loved ones, and your body would stop functioning. But we don't live in that world here, especially in North America, any longer. This writer goes on to say, we've become blinded by the endless tones of monitors and whirs of machines, buzzers, buttons, and tubes that can add 5 years to the shell of a body that was entrusted to us and should have been allowed to pass quietly, propped up in a corner under a window with scents of homemade soup in case she wanted to have something to sip on. But we're not there yet. So the medical apparatus that we have at our disposal is so devoted to keeping us alive, but it robs us of quality of life. And then it says, and if you don't want to keep going, well, I can't pull the plug.
Well, that's right. And the other aspect of that, and it's very true, is that it creates a sense of obligation to live on the part of somebody who, if they had another option that was dignified and appropriate and lawful and socially acceptable, would mitigate that sense of obligation. I have to stay around for my children, my grandchildren, etc. Quite apart from the fact that I am sick and being kept alive artificially, and if I really had freedom of choice and without the pejorative aspects of asking to end my own life, then I would do it because I'm suffering on a daily basis. The mere fact that you're hooked up to a machine doesn't mean that you're not suffering, quite apart from an absence of quality of life.
So let's talk about where we're at now. The decision came down last year, and the federal government, following the election, asked for an extension. They were granted 4 months, I believe.
That's correct.
So we're sitting in a situation right now where the clause that makes this illegal has been suspended. Is that?
Yeah, it's an unusual legal context.
Yeah.
Normally, you would think that if something is unconstitutional, as this restriction on physician-assisted dying was found to be back in 2011, I'll point out, originally by the trial judge who did a comprehensive analysis. And at that stage, the government was given a year, but instead of actually focusing on the issue, they focused on an appeal. And so I personally feel that the court has been much too generous with the government, and it was unnecessary, particularly because they had 2 years during the appeal process to figure out if they lost the case as they had at trial, what to do. And they could very well decide to do nothing.
Then what? What if they do nothing?
And that's probably, from my perspective, the best thing they can do, and leave this to the medical profession to deal with, and the provincial government to deal with some technical things like is there a need to have a statutory age of consent? Is there a need to give special sanction to advance directives and things of that nature? Those are bureaucratic issues, record keeping, reporting.
But do we wind up in limbo? Are we in limbo at that point where there is unclear definition or guidelines and people who are currently suffering?
I don't think, honestly, as my own personal perspective, I don't think there is any limbo. I think that the people who need guidelines are the doctors. They don't want to get sued. They don't want to get prosecuted. And the medical profession and the College of Physicians and Surgeons in each jurisdiction should be providing guidelines and say, look, you need to document your consents in a certain way. You need to keep records, that kind of thing.
So on the caring side of me, I look at somebody who's in pain and they're suffering, and I think, yes, I understand why you would want to terminate your life. And I would not want to stand in the way of you doing that. Yet, being on the other side of the equation, being someone who's going to be a part of that decision and live with it, whether I'm a family member or a physician, someone within the healthcare profession, I think, oh my gosh, that would have to be a very challenging process to go through, because we are talking about another person.
Well, but you're not talking about another person in the abstract. You're talking about an individual who says to their physician, I'm suffering from an illness that has robbed me of my will to live. Part of I have no obligation to live. I've reconciled my obligations to my family and my friends, and I can make this an event that is not, I know I'm going to die sooner or later, whether I have a terminal illness or I think I'm very healthy and end up with a heart attack, I'm going to die. We don't get a choice, usually.
Yes.
But if I have a choice, this is what I want. And this is what I want you to do to help me in a humane way, not not in something that's grotesque or awful, but in a humane way that allows me to have a peaceful exit with my family, with my loved ones, whoever they are. Why should we not have that option?
I don't disagree with you, but I can appreciate that it's also challenging, because
sure.
we've been living in a society that's been trying to push back the death envelope as far as we can.
And true, and there is still a stigma. We have to get rid of the stigma and make this an acceptable part of living, which is dying.
Once again, I got to get to just hang on for a second. We'll be right back after this break. Conversations That Matter is a not-for-profit program made possible thanks to the charitable support of the following and from viewers like you. Please visit conversationsthatmatter.tv and help us to continue to produce this program. Thank you. Just the topic, though, must ignite interesting conversations within families, because not everybody's prepared to go there, even though their loved one is in that position.
Well, I think it does require a bit of a cultural shift. But if you ask the majority, and there have been surveys done that I'm aware of, first of all, most people want to die at home, not in a hospital. And that makes sense. Second of all, I think most people want to die, and if they are in that state near death, they don't want to impose suffering on their families or their loved ones, whoever might be around them. They would like to go at a time of their choosing, not when they have no control.
So we're talking about people whose mental faculties are about them, and they can make a conscious decision and articulate that. There are still people who are suffering, who have been robbed of that capacity as well, and they are still left in that position where they're going to have to.
And the court hasn't
ride it out.
answered. The court has not answered that. But other than to say, if you're capable of expressing a consent, you know, where you, and your physician is capable of interpreting your consent as true consent, and not as something that is imposed on you by somebody else. But that's a marginal area. Let's get on with the business of accepting individual autonomy and deal with the fringe issues later. I mean, we may not be able to solve all these problems in a satisfactory way immediately, but I think we really have to start a cultural shift.
This is our final break. We'll be back in a moment. Conversations That Matter is a not-for-profit program made possible thanks to the charitable support of the following and from viewers like you. Please visit conversationsthatmatter.tv and help us to continue to produce this program. Thank you. It will be interesting to see how it unfolds, how the government reacts here in the coming days, because it's not too far off before they have to.
I'm hopeful that they recognize that this is really an issue between a doctor and a patient, that doctors on a regular basis make these decisions, whether we like it or not, and the court recognized that. They heard evidence about that the doctors in cancer wards all over the country, hundreds of times a day, are turning up the morphine drip when they think that people are at the end of their life.
Which is not the right way to be doing this.
No, it shouldn't be something that is unspoken and covert, because it still deprives the individual of the right to be at home, with family, with loved ones, and to pick the time of their departure.
And to leave this earth with dignity.
With dignity, and that's really what the whole case is about, is individual autonomy and dignity.
Yeah.
And it's been quite a battle.
Has it been an emotional ride for you?
Yeah, of course it has. I mean, it's been a long journey. So I was disappointed that the court gave an exemption in the first place, or an extension, and that they would actually consider giving the government, who I think has fallen down, whether it's this government or the former government, has fallen down in dealing with this in an efficient way, because I think essentially they were too concerned about losing votes as their primary concern, as opposed to dealing with the issue, recognizing the importance of the decision to Canadian society, and actually saying we don't need to legislate this. Let's wait. We can legislate about this in 2 or 3 years if we see there's a problem, which to me would be a sensible thing to do, but I'm somewhat idealistic.
Well, thanks to your idealism and that of others, we've moved forward and we are making a change in this country, and bringing about change.
Thank you. I can't take any credit for the outcome. That belongs to
But you were a contributor.
Well, I'll say my wife was a contributor. I helped her formulate some of the evidence and the arguments, and I was in the background a little bit. But the real the real heroes in this, I would say, are the lawyers who actually assembled the evidence in a tremendous, tightly constrained time frame from all over the world, who found the witnesses who were prepared to come forward, the ethicists, the legal scholars, people of that nature, and the trial judge, who did an incredible job of distilling the evidence and coming to a brave conclusion.
Where were you on the day of the judgment?
I was with my wife.
And
Yeah.
her reaction?
We were all elated,
Yeah.
but realized that the fight wasn't over.
Yeah.
The government was quite entrenched. They didn't want to lose.
No, they did not.
And you know, that is disturbing in itself.
Politics.
Yeah, indeed, that's really all it is. I mean, they could have looked at the issue and said, you know what, the time has come. We don't need to do this. I mean, they had a body of evidence. They had the trial judgment, which distilled it all and laid it out for them, the pros, the cons. And they could have said, you know what, we don't have to fight this battle.
Mm-hmm.
There are people who are suffering and will continue to suffer while this thing winds its way through the courts. And it's created a lot of stress. I know people have contacted my wife who are in horrible shape, who they live in the boondocks, so to speak. They don't have access to palliative care. They don't have the comprehension of what the case is about. They're unsophisticated, and they would like an out. And the government has effectively, by dragging its feet on this issue, by failing to do their homework, in my view, and by being sort of gutless, if I can put it that way, in taking an affirmative view of this and adopting what the trial court found, and said, we can deal with the problem of protecting vulnerable people. We don't need a blanket prohibition. Mm-hmm. That's all they had to say. We can create a structure, or we could have come to the same conclusions that the trial judge came, that this legislation is primitive, it's unfair, it's discriminatory, and it's unnecessary, and we can mitigate the hardship that it causes. Instead, they have put people through 5 years of litigation and a lot of misery.
But now the landscape is changing, and people's options are expanding.
Will be.
Will be.
Will be.
Yes.
Hopefully.
Yeah. Thank you for coming in and doing
My
this.
pleasure.